It was exactly 8:15 on a Sunday morning at the Royal Lodge. Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, was seated in his private, sunlit conservatory, savouring the quiet luxury of a life shielded from consequence. He was completely unaware that his untouchable sanctuary was about to be violently dismantled in exactly 10 minutes. Without knocking, without a royal summons, and bypassing the estate's elite private security detail entirely, a military equerry in full uniform marched directly across the hardwood floors of the royal dining room. The heavy, rhythmic thud of military boots shattered the morning silence, a relentless march of incoming doom. The equerry stepped right up to the breakfast table, locking eyes with the disgraced prince, and slammed a heavy, sealed manila envelope down over his silver plate. A startled Andrew jerked backward, knocking a crystal juice glass from the table. It shattered violently across the pristine floor tiles, a sharp, piercing crack that signaled the end of an era. The query did not blink. His voice was absolute ice. "You have 10 minutes to gather your immediate personal effects, Your Royal Highness. By order of the Prince of Wales, your lease is terminated, and your security funding is frozen immediately. If you do not vacate the premises, you will be arrested for trespassing on Crown property." Before we uncover the explosive 73-page financial dossier that triggered this bloodless coup, and before we reveal the devastating secret William used to overpower King Charles himself, I need you to do something. The palace works overtime to bury investigations exactly like this one. To help us bypass the royal censors, hack the algorithm, and expose these hidden truths to the world, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications right now. Your support is the only way we can continue pulling back the curtain on the darkest secrets of the House of Windsor. Now, let's get back into the shadows. How does a prince of the realm suddenly face arrest in his own home? Orchestrated not by the reigning king, but by his nephew. The mainstream press is already spinning their webs, attempting to spoon-feed you a sterilized narrative about a simple, petty real estate dispute over peeling paint and delayed roof repairs. They are lying to you. What you are witnessing is a surgically precise, institutional purge. This is the activation of the Shadow Regency. To grasp the sheer, unadulterated ruthlessness of what Prince William just pulled off, we must rewind the clock exactly 6 weeks. As the world is well aware, King Charles has been battling severe health challenges, enduring grueling medical treatments that have forced him to temporarily step back from the rigorous daily enforcement of palace discipline. Charles, burdened by the heavy weight of the crown and his own mortality, has always harboured a fatal weakness, a soft touch when it comes to his disgraced younger brother, Andrew. The king's leniency has been a protective shield, allowing the Duke of York to stubbornly cling to his sprawling 30-room royal fortress despite his catastrophic fall from public grace. But a power vacuum at the absolute pinnacle a 1,000-year-old monarchy never stays empty for long. While Charles retreated to the quiet, misty isolation of the Scottish Highlands to rest and recover, William quietly and decisively seized the reins of the Crown estate. 6 weeks ago, acting entirely outside the purview of his father's traditional courtiers and advisors, the Prince of Wales secretly commissioned an independent, highly classified, and totally ruthless forensic audit of the Royal Lodge's internal finances. William did not use the king's accountants, knowing their loyalties might be hopelessly entangled with the old guard of the palace. Instead, he deployed his own fiercely loyal, razor-sharp financial strike team from the Duchy of Cornwall. These were men and women who answered only to him. Their directive was simple and devastating. Tear apart every ledger, every invoice, and every hidden transaction tied to Prince Andrew's occupation of the Windsor properties. Leave no stone unturned. What they found, buried deep beneath layers of aristocratic obfuscation and creative accounting, is documented in a devastating file known in hushed palace corridors as the 73-page Crown Estate Memorandum. For weeks, rumours had circulated in the press that the audit was merely about Andrew failing to maintain the sprawling estate, a squabble over scaffolding and exterior paint. The truth, however, is a revelation so toxic it threatens to dismantle the monarchy's standing in Parliament. The exhaustive memorandum revealed an astonishing betrayal. According to highly placed whistleblowers who have seen the unredacted pages, Prince Andrew, increasingly desperate for untraceable cash to fund his lavish, exiled lifestyle, had allegedly been running a shadow enterprise right under the nose of the sovereign. He was quietly subletting the outer grace and favour cottages on the Royal Lodge estate to extremely wealthy, unvetted foreign dignitaries. We are talking about international oligarchs and shadowed billionaires, essentially renting royal proximity on the black market. Andrew had turned a highly secure, taxpayer-funded royal fortress into a private, off-the-books sanctuary for foreign wealth. When Prince William was presented with this memorandum, his reaction was described by insiders as nothing short of nuclear. The British monarchy is funded by the taxpayer. It survives on the delicate thread of public perception and institutional integrity. The absolute audacity of Andrew leveraging crown property for illicit personal enrichment was, in William's eyes, practically treasonous to the crown's reputation. William knew that taking this explosive evidence to his father would only result in more endless delays, more agonizing family debates, and more misguided leniency. So he chose to bypass the king entirely. To execute this maneuver, William's aggressive legal team dusted off a piece of constitutional dynamite that hadn't been weaponized in generations. The 1837 Regency Precedent Act. Combined with the obscure, centuries-old Duchy of Cornwall sovereign immunity clauses, this precedent establishes a terrifyingly absolute rule. It dictates that if the reigning monarch is physically indisposed or incapacitated to the point of stepping back from active estate management, the heir apparent assumes full, unmitigated, fiduciary control over all physical properties of the crown estate. This wasn't a request. It was an ironclad legal mandate. William did not need to beg his father for permission to evict his disgraced uncle. Under the strict, unforgiving interpretation of this archaic law, William was the law. He had become the shadow regent, wielding the full, crushing weight of the sovereign's authority without ever wearing the crown. He knew that the survival of the House of Windsor depended on excising the rot from within, no matter how deep the familial ties ran. William has spent a lifetime watching scandals erode the majesty of the institution he is destined to inherit. And the deployment of this Regency Act was his declaration of absolute war against the old ways. The legal trap was set, perfectly airtight and mathematically inescapable. All that remained was the face-to-face execution, setting the stage for a confrontation that would forever alter the Windsor bloodline. 2 days before the military equerry arrived with the eviction notice, shattering the quiet morning at the Royal Lodge, the atmosphere around the sprawling Gothic mansion was heavy with an impending, unseen storm. Thunderclouds rolled quickly over the ancient stone battlements as an unescorted black SUV tore up the gravel driveway. There was no royal motorcade. There was no press pool to document the moment. There was just the future king, driving himself, utterly alone and ready for war. William stepped out of the vehicle into the damp Berkshire air, his dark suit blending into the shadows of the encroaching storm. He did not wait for the household staff to announce him. He bypassed the terrified butler at the entrance and strode purposefully through the cavernous, echoing halls of the estate, heading directly for the private study. This was not a diplomatic visit. This was a tactical strike. Inside the dark, heavily wood-panelled room that smelled of aged leather, stagnant power, and decades of shielded entitlement, the Duke of York sat deep in a massive armchair. According to a source intimately close to the royal household who witnessed the fallout, the confrontation that followed was blistering, a masterclass in psychological warfare. Andrew, attempting to project an aura of untouchable aristocratic defiance, allegedly mocked his nephew's sudden intrusion and unyielding demeanour. He sneered, his voice dripping with the arrogant certainty of a man who had never faced a true consequence in his life. He told William that he was not the king, reminding him with a mocking laugh that his father had granted him an ironclad 75-year lease on the property. "You have no power here, boy. Andrew reportedly scoffed, leaning back into his leather chair, entirely miscalculating the lethal resolve of the man standing before him. William stopped pacing the perimeter of the room. The source described the Prince of Wales's demeanour in that moment as frighteningly icy, a chilling departure from the composed, diplomatic persona he presents to the public. His jaw locked with a sudden, violent tension. The veins in his forehead visibly pulsed under the dim light of the study, and his eyes were entirely devoid of any familial warmth. He did not shout. He did not lose his temper. Instead, William placed both hands firmly on the polished mahogany table, leaned over his uncle, and invaded his physical space with a suffocating, authoritative dominance. When he spoke, his voice was a low, deadly calm that seemed to drop the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. He looked his uncle dead in the eye and delivered a judgment that had been brewing for over 2 decades. "You have disgraced this family for the last time," William reportedly whispered, the words cutting through the heavy air like a razor. He brought up the one subject that remains the ultimate psychological trigger for the modern monarchy. He spoke of Princess Diana. "My mother spent years being tortured by the toxicity of this institution," William said, his voice vibrating with suppressed historical rage. "A toxicity that you thrived in. A corruption that you used to shield your own depravity. I made a promise to her memory when I was a teenager that if I was ever in a position of power, I would cleanse this house of the rot that destroyed her. I am not your nephew right now. I am the crown, and you are out." Andrew, blinded by his own hubris, thought it was a bluff. He believed it was merely the impassioned, empty threat of a younger generation overstepping its bounds. He thought he could simply wait for King Charles to return from Scotland and override the impulsive demands of the heir. It was a fatal miscalculation. The very next day, moving with terrifying speed and absolute constitutional precision, William convened an emergency, off-the-books session of the Privy Council. This was unprecedented. The Privy Council, the ancient and shadowy advisory body to the sovereign, usually convenes under the direct command of the king. But Charles, still recovering in the remote Highlands, was intentionally and strategically left entirely out of the loop. William utilised his newly activated authority under the Regency Act to gather the most powerful legal and political minds in the kingdom within a secure, subterranean chamber in London. With a unified and deeply intimidated Privy Council sitting before him, William brought down the hammer. He presented the 73-page Crown Estate Memorandum, laying bare the undeniable evidence of illicit subletting and financial degradation at the Royal Lodge. The room sat in stunned silence as the sheer magnitude of the liability was exposed. Without hesitation, William demanded the immediate, unilateral ratification of the revocation of Prince Andrew's grace and favour lease. But William is a brilliant strategist. He knew that breaking a 75-year lease in civil court could take years of agonising public litigation. He needed an immediate physical eviction. So he went much further than simply tearing up the paper contract. He attacked the logistics of Andrew's survival. With a single stroke of the pen, backed by the full, terrifying authority of the Privy Council, William severed the £3 million annual security budget provided to the Duke of York. The legal finality was absolute and mathematically perfect. Under the strict protocols of the Crown Estate, no individual, regardless of royal blood, is legally permitted to physically reside in a sovereign 30-room mansion without an active, palace-sanctioned perimeter security detail. By removing the guards, the armed police, and the surveillance budget, William exploited a massive loophole in the lease agreement. He effectively turned his uncle from a protected prince of the realm into a civilian trespasser overnight. If Andrew stayed, he would not be defying a family member, he would be violating national security protocols, rendering him subject to immediate arrest by ordinary police. Which brings us back to that shattered crystal glass on the breakfast room floor. 10 minutes. That is all the time Andrew was given to process the reality of his absolute, inescapable ruin. As we speak, the heavy, wrought iron gates of the Royal Lodge are besieged by a restless swarm of paparazzi, their camera flashes bouncing wildly off the sleek, rain-slicked sides of unmarked moving vans. Inside the perimeter, the deeply humiliating reality of a forced royal eviction is actively unfolding. Prince Andrew, suddenly stripped of his untouchable status, his dignity, and his sprawling fortress, is hastily packing his belongings under the cold, unblinking surveillance of William's private, ex-military security contractors. There is no royal deference being shown here today. There is no gentle handling of a fallen prince. He has been systematically and ruthlessly banished to a vastly smaller, heavily monitored and intentionally isolated cottage on the freezing, damp outer edge of the Windsor estate. This new residence is not a luxurious grace and favour home. It is a gilded cage, outfitted with state-of-the-art surveillance technology that reports directly back to the Duchy of Cornwall's headquarters. The psychological devastation is total. Prince William's shadow operation has been executed with lethal, surgical perfection. The young lion of the House of Windsor has finally bared his teeth, and the ancient, echoing corridors of Buckingham Palace are vibrating with absolute terror. The old guard of aristocratic courtiers, the men in grey suits who have spent decades covering up royal indiscretions with quiet payouts and gentle reprimands, now realize that a new, unforgiving era has dawned. William has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that he will sacrifice anyone, even his own blood, to protect the sanctity of the crown. But in the ruthless, high-stakes game of royal survival, a cornered animal is always the most dangerous threat in the room. The York family has been publicly humiliated, financially crippled, and physically displaced by this shadow regency. But they have not been entirely neutralized. Just 24 hours after the military equerry shattered Andrew's morning, the first seismic tremors, a massive, unprecedented counterstrike, was felt in the heart of London. The scene shifts abruptly from the sprawling, misty green estates of Windsor to the dark, hyper-exclusive streets of Mayfair. Hidden behind the unmarked, obsidian doors of one of Europe's most elite and impenetrable private members' clubs, a highly confidential, heavily guarded meeting took place in the dead of night. Grainy paparazzi photographs, captured by a lone photographer who had been tipped off by a terrified palace mole, reveal three figures slipping quietly through the shadows and into the building. The faces, illuminated briefly by a street lamp, are unmistakable, marked by a potent mixture of profound distress and cold, inherited determination. It was Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie. The York sisters are not merely the daughters of a disgraced prince. They are blood princesses of the realm, carrying the exact same royal lineage and constitutional weight as the Prince of Wales himself. They are fiercely, notoriously loyal to their father, and unlike Andrew, they possess a pristine public image, immense personal wealth, and a sprawling, fiercely loyal network of powerful aristocratic allies. But the true danger was not just the two princesses sitting in that dimly lit, smoke-free Mayfair parlour. The third figure sitting at the table, the man they had summoned in the middle of the night, was the absolute key to their vengeance. It was Sir Charles Falconer, a man widely feared across London as one of the most aggressive, ruthless, and high-stakes aristocratic litigators on the European continent. Falconer is a legal assassin. He is a man who makes his millions tearing apart impenetrable family trusts, dismantling centuries-old inheritance laws, and destroying the opposition in bitter, scorched-earth blood feud litigation. He does not take midnight meetings for minor disputes. He operates only when the stakes are existential. The implications of this secret, rain-swept summit are absolutely terrifying for the future of the monarchy. If Prince William is willing to weaponize obscure, archaic constitutional laws like the 1837 Regency Precedent Act to financially destroy his enemies, the York sisters are evidently preparing to deploy the modern, merciless, and incredibly public machinery of the civil courts against him. The cliffhanger that currently has the palace's legal department in a state of absolute hyperventilating panic is not the petty question of where Prince Andrew is going to live. The truly terrifying question echoing through the royal halls is this: are Beatrice and Eugenie preparing to fund and file a historic, unprecedented, multi-million-pound lawsuit directly against the Crown Estate and the Prince of Wales himself? Are they preparing a brutal legal campaign claiming tortious interference with a sovereign 75-year lease? If the Yorks pull this trigger, they will drag the internal, toxic, and highly classified mechanics of William's shadow regency out of the palace shadows and directly into the glaring, unforgiving light of the High Court. A lawsuit of this magnitude would legally force the public disclosure of internal palace communications, the unredacted 73-page financial audit, and perhaps even the deeply suppressed, highly sensitive medical records of King Charles that William used to justify his power grab in the first place. The civil war in the House of Windsor hasn't ended with a simple 10-minute eviction notice. It has just escalated, mutating from a private, behind-closed-doors family dispute into a devastating, scorched-earth legal battlefield that could bankrupt the monarchy's public reputation forever. The battle lines are drawn in blood and ink, and the legal explosives are wired beneath the throne. We are watching the potential unraveling of a 1,000-year-old institution in real time, and the establishment media is going to do everything in its power to keep you in the dark. The palace will issue distractions. They will release carefully staged family photos, and they will try to bury the story. But we will be right here, tracking every secret midnight meeting, analysing every leaked court document, and exposing every ruthless maneuver in this modern royal Game of Thrones. Do not let the algorithm hide the truth from you. If you want to stay ahead of the curve and know exactly what is happening behind those heavily guarded palace gates before it hits the mainstream news, you need to hit that subscribe button right now. Impress that like button to help us push this investigation past the royal censors. Leave a comment below telling me whose side you are on, the ruthless, calculating future king, or the cornered, vengeful Yorks. And make absolutely sure your notifications are turned on for our next emergency update. The Crown is at war with itself. Keep your eyes open, question every single narrative you read in the papers, and remember, nothing in the palace is ever as it seems.